There are very few things that humans like about themselves, and music is one of them.
They're making $1 million every hour through streams.
So the labels pimped out their own artists to take a greater equity position in a rising business.
We're just as greedy as the record companies are, maybe even greedier.
Why would you think that music is valuable? Value is driven by scarcity, and music is not scarce at all.
Understand that you are being manipulated by the technology, which is not new.
Who wrote the algorithm?
It's like we're hospital patients hooked up to a feeding bag with the music.
The exploitation can just keep happening because, you know, it happens in the dark. It happens in silence.
It's very easy to rip off somebody when you know it's a thing that they love above all else. You can't lose.
Seeing your favorite musical artist live can be an unforgettable, transformative experience. But unfortunately, obtaining a ticket to this rite of passage can be a nightmare.
For many fans of Taylor Swift, there is definitely some bad blood, at least between them and Ticketmaster.
Ticketmaster says it is canceling tomorrow's public sale of tickets for her tour.
Thousands of her fans found themselves shut out of her concerts in a Ticketmaster meltdown.
Now I'm out of the queue. They're all gone. Like, this blows.
The website fully crashed. This is so unfair. Sorry, someone beat you to these seats. Or an error. Ah! Oh my God! $1,000
It has never felt this hard, this difficult. It's never felt like a system or a company was trying to really screw me over as actively as Ticketmaster were messing this up.
The site was glitching. They let way too many people in at the same time. There were clearly people there who were not supposed to be there, be them scalpers or be them bots or what have you, that were crashing the site and keeping tickets out of the hands of real fans.
Look at the prices. Look at this ridiculous prices. This is highway robbery. Nobody pay this.
People first started to criticize Ticketmaster mainly for the fees that they were placing on tickets, which you had no choice but to pay.
They can come as a nasty surprise at the very end of a transaction and can range from the annoying to the completely batshit.
That's only kind of the tip of the iceberg. But underneath that, there's the structural problem that all of the promoters and then all the ticketers are all belonging to the same company.
Ticketmaster merged back in 2010 with LiveNation. LiveNation, in addition to selling tickets through Ticketmaster, also promotes tours, produces tours, and owns some venues. So really all along, it's got a piece of the chain right up to when a musician hits the stage.
People sometimes like to think Ticketmaster is just some third party that when you're buying your concert tickets, you know, they're taking $20 from you for no good reason and running off with it. Ticketmaster, in many cases, is actually the concert promoter, and that gives them a ton of market power. If people are upset about the ticketing industry or about the live music industry, there's one very obvious place where everyone can point their finger, and that's LiveNation Ticketmaster.
This morning, bad blood is boiling over into a lawsuit.
Baby love, I think I've been a little too kind.
26 Swifties suing Ticketmaster and its parent company LiveNation, alleging fraud and price fixing, claiming the pre-sale snafu for Swift's upcoming Eras tour is just one example of the tight grip Ticketmaster has on the industry.
This lawsuit isn't the only trouble Ticketmaster may face. Congress has already said it would hold a hearing looking into the issues the service had during the pre-sale.
What was interesting about the Taylor Swift situation is that in Washington, things move very, very slowly. You know, there are all kinds of issues with, you know, inflation and China and the war in Ukraine and the homeless problem and so on and so on. Yet they were able to convene a congressional committee to investigate Taylor Swift tickets in 10 weeks. That's pretty impressive.
I just want to dispel this notion that this is not a monopoly.
May I suggest respectfully that Ticketmaster ought to look in the mirror and say, I'm the problem. It's me.
It's me. Hi,
they're sitting there having their gotcha moment, reading Taylor Swift lyrics off of a script. It's almost like an episode of Veep. Like, it's literally farcical at this point. And the perspective of how this actually matters in the grand scheme of things seems to be lost.
Part of what's tricky about Ticketmaster is that we know what fans want. Fans want tickets to their favorite artists to be available and cheap. In theory, Taylor Swift could stay on the road for 5 years, right? She could hit every market night after night after night until everyone who wants to see Taylor Swift had gotten a chance. It probably still wouldn't satisfy people. There's only so many seats. How do you figure out which fans are gonna get them and at what price? I think that's actually a more complicated question than people realize.
People have been trying to find an ethical and equitable way to sell tickets to an event ever since the Greeks first opened their first outdoor theater in Athens on the side of the Acropolis in 328 BC. It is a complicated, opaque, murky, corruptible system. There are a lot of things wrong with Ticketmaster. There are a lot of things we can debate about Ticketmaster, but I'm not sure if there is anything that we can come up with that's better.
Despite facing the Swifties, a government investigation, and widespread scrutiny, the power of the industry prevailed. No new regulations were imposed on LiveNation. The company is pledging support for a fair ticketing act, but is leaving it to policymakers to bring about change.
The important thing to remember about Ticketmaster is that it's deeply ingrained in the music industry.
Son, letting you know that we have 0 degrees for a temperature reading out there, and let's get on the way.
Dysfunction in the record business is nothing new. It's simply consistent with its long, sordid history.
I'm telling you that rock and roll basically is no different than IBM, Xerox, Sara Lee, Chevrolet. Supply and demand, it's the same business.
People in all industries graft, and rock's another industry to a lot of people, and so they graft.
The music industry, since it was founded somewhere around the 1880s, has always been kind of a wild, wild west situation.
The practices of the music executives were often basically to just swindle both the artist and the customer simultaneously and accrue most of the royalties to themselves. It was particularly bad for black artists who had very little professional representation and would often make pennies to the dollar on what the music industry was making.
The era of record stores and terrestrial radio was often an era of shady business practices, sometimes literal briefcases full of cash, sometimes actual gangsters controlling this industry.
There's always been a lot of hustlers and fly-by-night operators that have been attracted to the music business because it is possible for somebody with hustle and not a lot else to really make a score.
Out I'm sitting on this stumpy out of cloud gutter worried.
The musicians, in a sense, have never really been in control and have always had to struggle to figure out a way to thrive or just to survive in this kind of chaotic and kind of shark-infested waters that has been the music industry.
This is a business. This is a business enterprise. The music industry is an industry. It's not just like a collection of stories and heartfelt memories and moments. It is an enterprise.
For decades, the music business made enormous profits selling vinyl records to eager fans, exploiting the desire to keep up with their musical heroes.
It all started back in the 20s with the '78 record.
Then there were the 33s, cassettes. While cassettes are holding their own, it's just a matter of time before the vinyl record breathes its last gasp.
The music industry was in a slump in the early 80s. Partly because of the introduction of blank cassette tapes that would allow people to pirate their vinyl. The invention of the Walkman really created a personalized soundtrack for your life as you moved about the city. Maybe you were going for a run. Maybe you were at the gym. Or maybe you were walking through your high school with a skateboard with your headphones on, right? This was, in many ways, the iconic 80s experience. I had one. I loved it. I took it everywhere. If you look at teen movies of the 80s, for example, say Back to the Future, you'll notice that the protagonists in those movies are often not listening to cassette tapes that they have purchased at the store. They're listening to mixes or dubs that their friends have made.
So the truth is that we were all pirating music throughout the 90s, and I don't know anybody who wasn't. All of my records were on cassettes, every single one of them.
Faced with an existential threat to their bottom line, record labels had to find a new way to convince fans to part with their cash. Technology would provide the answer.
What rescued them was the introduction of the compact disc.
To CD or not to CD?
But this is no ordinary disc. The music is recorded onto it digitally, and there's no needle being dragged through a groove.
Well, let's give it the breakfast time test. Some honey, nice and sticky, and smear that over liberally.
The music industry was going to convince everyone to rebuy their record collection on CD at inflated prices because CDs sold for so much more than vinyl records, even though they were so much cheaper to make, and it was like a gold rush.
Nobody expected the discs to be as popular as they are, but the market has doubled over the last year.
These were the salad days for the record industry. They made way more money, much bigger profits than they ever had before.
And then in retrospect, you say, oh, to put music on a CD, you have to digitize it. And once you digitize music, as computer storage grows and upload and download speeds go up, there's no reason you need the CD anymore because it's just digital information.
In the 1980s, there was a rogue group of German computer scientists who worked at a place called the Fraunhofer Institute, led by a research scientist named Karl-Heinz Brandenburg. Brandenburg invented the MP3, which was the successor to the compact disc. What it did was to take advantage of various little tricks to fool the human auditory system into not hearing the parts of the compact disc that weren't really audible. And this allowed Brandenburg, with his MP3, to shrink the size of the audio files by about 90%. And when you shrunk them that much, you could be able to distribute them through a computer connection. The record industry did not want to invest in the MP3. They were enjoying too much of the profits from their compact discs. They basically kicked Brandenburg out of their offices. So Brandenburg, in frustration, posted the encoder and decoder for the MP3 online for public download for free. Now, Brandenburg will say he did not condone piracy, but he had introduced to the internet the virus that was going to kill the music industry.
Then we come to June 1st, 1999, and this guy named Sean Fanning gives out this piece of software he calls Napster to a bunch of friends, asking these 30 people or so, please don't share this.
This is the problem, a program called Napster that allows people to share music files, hit singles by top stars, all for free.
With a connection, a keystroke, and a click, Peter Nias can find and get virtually any song ever written, copying it from someone else's computer somewhere on the internet.
They could go online at any time of the day or night and for free download as much music as they wanted, more than they could ever dream.
The big players in the American music industry are turning up the heat on people who download songs.
The recorded music industry freaks out about this, and of course, rightly so. Their first inclination is to try and sue the hell out of these digital pirates. They go after companies like Napster and LimeWire and Kazaa and Audio Galaxy Satellite and BearShare and a ton of others.
When suing Napster and other file-sharing sites wasn't enough to stop the flow of piracy, record labels turned their attention to the consumers themselves.
U.S. industry officials say starting today, they will track down and sue the biggest offenders, hundreds of them.
There are tools that we can utilize to identify not just the infringing material being offered up, but the individuals that are actually offering up that infringing material.
Jamie Thomas was an Ojibwe Native American woman who lived on a reservation in northern Minnesota.
The Supreme Court has turned away an appeal from a Brainerd woman who has been ordered to pay a record company's $222,000 for the unauthorized downloading of copyrighted music.
She was essentially a poor woman who the music industry decided to sue into oblivion because she had downloaded, or someone at her IP address had downloaded 24 songs.
You thought you owned this music, and you think maybe your kids may have shared the files? Is that pretty much basically it?
Yes, I actually own those songs that they accused me of downloading off of Kazaa. I own them on CDs.
Right.
And I think possibly one of my children might have put them into the Kazaa shared folder. I don't know for sure.
But for whatever reason, the jury found her liable for, copyright infringement, and the Supreme Court finally ruled that yes, indeed, Jamie Thomas now owed the music industry $222,000.
But it was a game of whack-a-mole, and the more they tried, the more they failed.
And of course, you had some musicians, Lars from Metallica was the most famous one, saying like, this isn't great, piracy's not great.
Which is becoming increasingly important to us is to try and get this debate out into the public forum, to try and make people understand what's at stake here and what the ramifications are if this is not something that's dealt with.
But he was kind of drowned out by all the fans and some musicians who were like, no, we hate the old system, let's burn it down, we don't care.
Music should be available to anybody that wants to hear it. I think that there should be no such thing as a price tag on music. When it's someone that sold 50 million records and they got 50 million fucking dollars and they're bitching about pennies, fuck you, man.
The catch was, the people who figured out something new were like business people too. The new system wasn't some artist cooperative. The new system was a new bunch of companies who were working to efficiently and profitably give us listeners what we want. Sometimes what we say we want is some nice thing where we can really support the musicians, and then what we actually want is just to be greedy, and we want to be able to gorge on as much music as we can hear.
For a time, no one was building an MP3 player. And the reason they weren't building it is they thought perhaps they would be held legally liable for enabling piracy by building one. Well, this created a tremendous opportunity for whomever was going to be the first person to roll out kind of a high-quality consumer-grade MP3 player. And that ended up being Apple.
iPod, 1,000 songs in your pocket.
So Steve Jobs rounds up all the heads of the major record labels and says, you guys are screwed. You need somebody to handle digital distribution of your music. And they were desperate enough to turn everything over to Steve Jobs.
No one has really found the recipe yet for digital music. And we think not only can we find the recipe, but we think the Apple brand is going to be fantastic because people trust the Apple brand.
Jobs claimed with a straight face that his device was not meant for piracy. He kind of rolled out this Apple Store technology that was going to sell songs for 99 cents a piece. Meanwhile, he's selling a device that can hold 10,000 songs. So, are we going to find any consumers who are going to pay $9,900 to fill up their iPod player with MP3s? No, we are not, right? Whatever Jobs said, whatever he claimed, the reality was that the iPod was a device that was going to enable and turbocharge music piracy.
There's nothing new, everything has been created, and it's utterly hated. You never played the songs I wanna hear. Let's wait to see it on the radio.
I think the industry kind of realized that they'd been hoodwinked by Steve Jobs eventually, but by then it was too late.
And if you look at the record industry's profitability during the iPod and Apple Store era, this is when it really went off a cliff. This is what really killed it. In some cases, cutting music industry revenues by 50 or 60%. It was just a disastrous business model that never worked for them. It was possible to believe that the recording industry might disappear entirely. And along comes Daniel Ek.
Daniel Ek wants to figure out a new way to make money from music, right? He's an entrepreneur who wants to find a new way to make music profitable.
Oh, really? You downloaded Napster and you were like, this thing is phenomenal.
Yeah, I just realized at that moment, like, holy shit, this is what I want to do. This is going to be the next big thing. If Napster was the first thing that got me into the internet, how is it that music just hasn't been solved?
He sort of said to himself, what I'm going to do is take the next generation of consumers and move them away from pirated music and into this new streaming model. Put everything on one central server and stream it back to the customer as a subscription model.
Introducing Spotify.
A world of music.
Whatever you want.
Whenever you want.
Instant, simple, and free.
It doesn't speak that well to the quality of leadership at the time in the music industry. In other words, the music industry did not natively produce the kind of genius that could have reorganized things, right? That apparently had to come from outside.
So when Ek first started marketing the solution in 2006, 2007, and 2008, he was finally able to get the sign-on from the labels because what did they have to lose? They didn't want to do it. They were forced into it. But ultimately, it was the only thing that they could do to survive.
In any industry, if you're faced with a situation where people no longer have to pay to get the thing that you're selling, you've got to come up with a new business plan. You've got to either make it impossible for the listener to get the thing for free, or you've got to give them a product that's more convenient than the thing they could get for free.
So they put their hooks into Spotify, taking equity positions. They negotiated hard when it came to licensing this music, and they took their share off the top before it got to the artist. So they were able to turn their fortunes around to the point now where the streaming music companies are the greatest source of revenue for the record labels.
The argument was not a moral argument in the end that won. It was an argument of convenience. We're going to make this easy. It was not that they made it impossible to download MP3 files. It was like, no, you could still download the albums if you wanted to, but look, wouldn't it be easier to just give us $10 a month and listen to whatever you wanted?
Very slowly, Spotify began to displace MP3 piracy.
'Cause baby, now we got bad blood. You know it used to be mad love.
Then Apple Music comes along, and then somebody else, and somebody else, and somebody else.
Alexa, play Abbey Road by the Beatles on Amazon Music.
Come together.
People realized, oh, we don't need to buy music at all. We can just sort of pay for access to music. We can rent access to music. And that's a real sea change in how we think about music, right? Older listeners think about, this is a great album. Do I want to buy it? Right? There's that moment of decision. Is this worth $10? And younger listeners never had that. Younger listeners never had a point of saying, like, I don't know if I want to buy it. They're just like, I'll check it out.
Streaming has become the dominant way to engage with music, but how has it changed our relationship to music and the artists we love?
In the streaming era, people have been taught that music is something to listen to passively and not pay a lot of money for, and I think that does have big implications.
The fan, though they may not completely realize it, begins to resemble one of those people in the pods in the Matrix. Every aspect of listening, consuming, even choosing what to listen to, has kind of been outsourced away from the consumer in the name of convenience and portability. And a big machine kind of decides what we're going to listen to.
We're only served music that the algorithm thinks that we will like. And it doesn't necessarily take us beyond our comfort zone when it comes to music. There's no one there to take you by the hand and say, here's something really different.
They design it in a way where they want you to put things on random. They want you to listen to playlists. They want you to not think of anything as a unified whole. It's this idea of making us pay less attention and be less intentional with how we listen to music. And I think that's a really disappointing thing about the streaming era.
There's no agency on our part, and that creates a different, kind of more passive set of expectations in the consumer. They're paying a flat subscription fee for essentially a machine learning algorithm to tell them what's hot.
Who wrote the algorithm? Who's making those decisions? Whose biases went into creating that algorithm, right? People think that the algorithm is based on their music choices, but it may also be based on somebody else's choices too.
I think it's a valid question to ask, is the power really in the algorithm? There's kind of like this new phrase for it, for algorithmic anxiety, that, am I actually choosing these things because I like them, or is an algorithm telling me that I like them, and so it is?
Kids say to you all the time today, they say to me, the algorithm knows me better than I know myself. And what to me that means is the work of developing taste and deciding, what you like, which is not easy and takes time, is basically now been outsourced to algorithms.
Listen to any CD before you buy at the CD Source Future Show.
When I was younger and I would go to a record store and I would just go and listen to the CDs at the listening booth, and I'd sit there for hours and just soak in the music and be like, okay, this is a really serious decision. I'm going to buy this one. Sometimes things that you didn't like at first would grow on you. It happened to me where it would become like my favorite album ever, but maybe I would have never came to that conclusion if I had access to every song that's come out in recorded history.
Music evolved from a commodity that you purchased at a store to a utility that you subscribe to. I turn the faucet and the water comes on. I don't think a lot about that. Electricity shows up to my house. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it. Music is streamed from some centralized server somewhere directly to my ears. It becomes kind of a background sonic wash.
Streaming services are so much more focused on individual songs than albums and artists and bodies of work in the way that, CDs and vinyl used to be. So if you went and bought a CD from an artist, maybe you were only buying it to listen to the hit single on repeat, sure, but you'd still be buying an album, and you still probably listened to all the songs on it, and things like album art mattered, things like lyric booklets mattered. You had this context about the artist that came with the music you were listening to, and that doesn't exist as much on streaming.
There is no one there to tell you who the artist is, why they're important, why they wrote this song. Nobody to tell you about the album, the scene, the sound, the history. There's none of those things.
So it's actually pretty easy for people today to listen to music for hours without actually knowing who the artists are behind any of the songs, or to kind of even orient their fandom around songs and not artists. It's a really bad thing for the music industry in the long term. You're not developing, icons. You're not having an impact on culture. This is kind of the soft power that music has. Something like Michael Jackson's Thriller today might have less of a cultural impact, just because it's hard to create these shared cultural experiences that people used to have in the past when the entire entertainment landscape was a lot less congested. I think it's hard to create that type of huge moment that everyone remembers, that lasts for so long, because everyone is in their own little niche these days, and it's hard to even determine what is the mainstream.
We have more music out there than we will ever listen to. We have more music out there than we will ever be able to absorb.
The most recent estimation was that 100,000 new songs are added to streaming services every day. At the start, it was perceived as this really amazing, democratizing force. On the one hand, it's a great time to be an artist because the tools for music making and release are so cheap and easy and accessible. But on the other hand, that just means that the market has become really flooded with so much new music and so many new artists.
There is a statistic that says of the 90 or 100 million songs available on Spotify, 20% have never been streamed once.
Imagine a small shop with a giant warehouse behind it, right? You've gained access to having your stuff stocked in the warehouse, but nobody sees it because they only go in the shop. Most music on Spotify will never be heard by anyone. You've gained access, but no one's gonna hear you.
In fact, more than ever before, people are clustering to a few musicians at the top. So the internet, in fact, has not democratized the culture. It has created a winner-take-all effect for a few super artists who can, more than ever before, kind of dominate the global marketplace for music, and a bunch of also-rans who can't really form the kind of subculture support that they need to persist.
It's like you made it past those bastards who've been holding you back for years, and you've gotten here, but you're not making any money.
One of the things so many of us can't wait to do again is see live shows. The performing arts have taken a tough hit during the pandemic.
I have tickets for 2 concerts this summer, and I don't think they're going to happen, to be honest.
It really struck home when these walls came down was how precarious our existence was. You know, okay, it was like a month, we're fine. 2 months, we're okay. We have enough. 3 months, oh, how are we going to pay rent?
Amid the chaos and uncertainty of canceled shows and shuttered venues, musicians were in emotional and financial distress. Without touring, many struggled to make ends meet. Some even faced bankruptcy.
The pandemic shined a really harsh light on the economics of being an artist, because the moment that everyone lost touring, so many artists, even artists that you think are fine, that you think of as superstars, weren't earning enough money.
Afrofuturist, black urbanist, black journalist, black herbalist, revisionist, I resurrect through remembrance. Black community stay strong, resilience. Wish my people were treated with reverence.
Touring is the most important factor for a musician today. You know, traditionally it has always been where musicians make most of their money. So suddenly it was like, okay, what am I gonna do?
I know a bunch that went on unemployment. I know a bunch that had breakdowns.
What were all the traditional domains of a musician to be able to make money had died overnight.
When the pandemic stripped away performance revenues, musicians found themselves relying on streaming royalties, reigniting the long-simmering feud between artists and streamers.
Musicians normally love to hear their songs played, but there's a growing revolt against one particular type of music service.
Taylor Swift pulled all of her music from Spotify, fed up, like so many others, at the pennies they pay.
I can say it the way you like.
Pharrell's powerful agent, who manages a raft of big names, just told YouTube to remove 20,000 songs that he says aren't properly licensed.
The income that we get from streaming revenue is like very low. It's a fraction of a cent every time someone plays my song. And even that amount, usually depending on what your situation is with your masters, is you might not receive any of that money anyway.
The difference with Spotify is you get paid every single time someone plays your song.
In this new model, which works pretty well for you, they don't feel it works pretty well for them compared to the transaction model on, again, iTunes or Amazon or
right.
whatever.
I don't agree because, again, we're the second largest digital revenue stream for labels in Europe already after iTunes.
I'm talking about artists, though, not labels.
Sure, but again, you know, our relationship right now, we pay out the money to the labels, and the labels are in turn paying out the artists.
Most people think that their $10 goes to what they listen to. But actually what happens is, your $10 goes into a giant bucket of money, right? And then they calculate all of the streams across the entire system, and they divide all of the money by all of the streams, and then they share it out. So the system, the pool system of paying out, funds music that you don't listen to, right? You are directly supporting music that you don't listen to, which is the most fundamental change in the culture of music. When we had physical music, you bought an artist record, that money went to the artist. Now, you listen to an artist once, they might get a third of a penny, right, if they're lucky, right?
It's so extractive and inherently exploitative, and the last person who usually gets a cut is the artist.
What people forget is that these artists have a job, and their job is to make music and to entertain us. So they don't do this just for love. They do it because it's a way to make a living for what their talents provide. They should be compensated for that.
In March of 2023, Spotify's all-time payouts were up to $40 billion, but the payments rarely go to the artists first. Rights holders like record companies and music publishers take their cut, and then they decide how much trickles down to the artists.
Nowadays, you see artists who are great at interacting with fans on social media, who have incredibly vibrant TikTok pages, who get discovered on TikTok, right? They go viral on TikTok. So there are these other paths to success.
This little mini truck badge is unbearable. Hit me with the high note. Hit me with a really high note.
I think the pandemic absolutely is a huge player in how TikTok and just largely social media have really quickly become so important to the music industry.
Catherine's story, a TikTok star who never really left her bedroom in terms of building a fan base, was a fantastically interesting phenomenon that hadn't really existed before.
Watching that your chest and your shoulders are relaxed.
My very first TikTok was in November of 2020. I think it was a Bruno Mars medley, like his most popular songs. At the time, I was in grade 11, and that's when all of my classmates and peers were trying to figure out what to do after graduation, and I knew that I wanted to do music.
Oh my God, I think it's happening.
TikTok was becoming more and more of a big platform, and I saw a few other musicians using it to help their careers and reach more people, so I decided why not also hop on that train. And eventually that turned into original songs and original snippets that I would write. My first viral moment was when I posted a snippet of my song Heartache. I posted that in December of 2020. It really showed me that maybe I could pursue music. Like, that was the sign that I needed. Like, oh, people can relate to my music. People are actually listening.
This already happened once, and it's already been
everyone is kind of agreeing that the traditional playbook does not work anymore. And in many ways, it's getting kind of thrown out the window. In the past, pre-social media, even pre-digital, record labels were going out and, finding a pretty much never before heard artist, working with them, developing them, helping them to create an album, and then releasing it. And now that process is almost completely reversed, where so many labels will only sign an artist once they've already developed a following on social media and already have a hit. Fans are the ones that are kind of deciding what artists and songs the labels pay attention to.
Hate to say it, but it's just been like that. Nothing else has changed.
TikTok was doing a campaign with American Eagle. They were doing a hashtag challenge and looking for an artist who would rewrite one of their songs to fit the hashtag challenge, and they pitched me.
Oh my God, I think it's happening again. Sort of myself, I would be letting it end. But every time I look at those brown eyes and you smile.
Social media created opportunities for some artists. It also gave fans unprecedented freedom to express themselves. But at what cost?
TikTok really blew open all the opportunities for that by allowing people for the first time to actively engage with the music that they're a fan of and put their own spin on it. It turned music into something that you participate in rather than just something that you passively listen to.
You can speed it up or slow it down. You can change it, you can remix it, or you can make your own video. Like, there's this Lady Gaga song, Bloody Mary.
I'll dance, dance, dance with my hands.
It's now been sped up and it's been part of this Netflix show Wednesday. That version is now the thing that then becomes a viral video. So the fan has become much more involved in the artist's image on TikTok, and the artist basically has to be willing to tolerate having their stuff kind of messed with.
Artists don't really have any control over what's happening with their music anymore. It's just, my music could be synchronized to like a bunch of like frat boys farting into glasses of Chardonnay, and I have no control over that. I suppose I should be thankful for the billionth of a cent that TikTok pay me when their farts are exactly in rhythm with one of my long-forgotten masterpieces.
The way artists are paid on TikTok is not by having their music streamed. It's by having somebody make a video using their music, right? That's how you get paid. And that, in and of itself, is like almost a radical rethinking of what like ownership and copyright means. Like, you're getting paid not to make it, but when a fan remakes it.
From a certain perspective, you could celebrate that as a really participatory model of what it means to listen to music, and the idea that listening to music is itself a creative act, and it means participating in this creative economy instead of just being a passive consumer.
There's this pressure to make music a certain way that's going to work well with these apps, and I feel like there is a danger to that. It's important to remember that we're making art and it's not a totally commercial enterprise. And I don't want to get to the point where we're all just making jingles.
The contemporary, really successful musician is a brand identity merchant first and a musician second. And TikTok obviously is a huge part of this.
Once you start doing that, it becomes like you're just a content creator. You're not an artist. And I don't want to feel like that.
Fuck people who call musicians content creators. I mean, just fuck them. Music is not content. It's always been this incredibly abstract, difficult to value thing in the world, but it doesn't mean that we should all just accept that it's nothing.
Streaming might be the most convenient way to listen to artists of the past and present. But recent trends show that some listeners are yearning for a more physical connection. Is the future of music in the hands of the fans?
It's so interesting that an artist like Taylor, who was really born of the social age, has been the biggest redistributor of vinyl collection and really being able to convince us to line up at the stores and buy all these multiple different editions of the same album. And I feel like it's introduced a whole new generation of people to the art of collecting vinyl, listening to it. I had never bought a record until I bought Folklore, and I still don't even have a record player, and yet I have it just kicking around. Did you buy any vinyl from Taylor, Madeline?
Well, just like you, I bought the Folklore vinyl and I didn't even have a record player, but the following Christmas, my husband bought me a record player, and that's when I started to collect vinyl. But I actually love it now. Like, getting all the special editions of Taylor's records is really fun, but it's also really fun to just go to the record store and dig around in the collection that they have and find stuff for my own collection. I really enjoy engaging with physical music in that way.
One encouraging sign I'm seeing is the continued rise of vinyl culture, and that shows that people want something tactile, they want something that they can look at and read, and something that's so inconvenient in the way it's consumed that you show people that this is how much you love music.
Music is magic. You know, that's never going to change. Any like songs that really resonate with us and just touch us on a molecular level, like that won't go away.
I do still think that music and artists have the power to move people and to move culture. I think we've seen that with artists like Bad Bunny and Billie Eilish and Lizzo and Lil Nas X, who have all shifted culture in ways that have nothing to do with their music.
What you say, boy? Got this boy speaking Spanish. Ay, papi.
Yo la invitación, muchacho, deja eso. Ey, Titi me preguntó si tengo muchas novias. Muchas novias. Hoy tengo una.
I'm not your friend or anything. Damn, you think that you're the man. I think therefore I am.
As long as the artist stays true to them, the listeners will be able to tell. I think everyone is always able to tell if someone's being genuine or not, and that's what really establishes that connection between the singer and the listener.
So there's going to be room for new people to come along and forge new connections with us, the listeners. And again, those connections, ultimately, that's what inspires the listening in the first place.
Take your time with music, listen to it, try to appreciate it, and occasionally listen to stuff you know you don't like, because you could find something that will change your life.
Maybe we get to a place where some people are like, yes, I love music, and other people are like, eh, and it's just one more pastime, rather than the nearly universal language of cultural identity. That would make me sad, because I love the era we're living through where it seems like everyone is obsessed with music, and I hope people continue to be that obsessed with music.
It's just time to catch up. It's time to get to a place where creators are put back at the center of the system and paid accordingly. Getting rid of the revenue share pool model would help that a lot, but also going to governments around the world and saying, we need copyright law that reflects the world we live in, not the one that record companies want to keep telling us that we live in.
Big artists, they have so much power. And it's the same with fans. It's the fans speaking out, they get things done. And we have a lot more power than we realize, and I think a lot of these companies, they want us to forget that we have the power.
It strikes me, when we've got this thing that we know makes people happy, that we know improves our well-being and our mental health, that we should cherish it, that we should protect it, right? That doesn't strike me as a crazy idea.